Attorneys general from 22 states, including Maine, have sued to block President Trump's move to end a decades-old immigration policy known as birthright citizenship, guaranteeing U.S.-born children are citizens regardless of their parent status. Trump's roughly 700-word executive order amounts to a fulfillment of something he's talked about during the presidential campaign. Chapters of the American Civil Liberties Union in Maine, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts, along with other immigrant rights advocates, also filed a suit in New Hampshire federal court. They say birthright citizenship is enshrined in the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. Maine Attorney General Aaron Frey says in part, quote, "The election did not change the Constitution, and legal action is required to remind the president that his oath is to uphold that sacred document, not rewrite it," unquote.